Chair. I think we have everybody, and Commissioner Davis now has audio as well. Thanks, Chair.
Everyone, apologies for the slight delay. For the first time ever during this pandemic, we had a technical problem connecting to a virtual meeting. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we are going to have additional discussion resolving around the issues of the FIS design for 2022 through 2024. And then I think we were going to move on to the presentation on issues related to economic work for the IPHC. Is that correct, Dr. Wilson?
That's correct, yes. So if the Secretary can upload that presentation, we can pass to Dr. Stewart through the chair.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, Commissioners, for the opportunity to provide a little bit more detail on the considerations that went into the two 2022 FIS designs that were presented yesterday. I'll begin by just recapping a few of the basic design parameters that we used into the projections. We assumed for 2022 that the stock trend would be down 5%, and that the price trend would be down 2.5%. And I will provide, at the end of this brief presentation, I'll provide an evaluation of the sensitivity to those two assumptions. I'm not presenting the rest of the detailed information here that goes into our design projections, but that does include a projection of bait price. It utilizes the catch rates on a charter region by charter region basis from the most recent survey that was conducted in each of those charter regions. And it also includes the most recent bids and accounts for any changes that might be made in terms of number of skates, scaling those bids up or down in proportion to the number of skates that we anticipate to be fished. As was noted yesterday, the 2022 design initially was based on a revenue neutral projection. However, based on the end of season results from the 2021 FIS, which showed a positive revenue at the end of the season, we were able to reduce the overall footprint of the 2022 design by targeting a net revenue loss of $200,000. To refresh your memory on what the two designs look like visually, this is design one, the Secretariat recommendation, and you'll note in the upper left-hand panel of this portion of this map the full coverage of yellow or orange, depending on your screen, on the 4 CD and E edge, extending all the way up to the Russian EEZ. Now, I will note that this design has been presented several times now to the various advisory bodies, and most recently at SRB 19, the SRB did support this design, noting that recommending that the Secretariat prioritize designs that include 4 CD and E, and this was in fact the specific design that we presented to them. And they noted several factors here: the potential for future range shifts, as well as the need for biological samples that would be important in understanding the biology at the leading edge of the range of the species. I note that those are the primary considerations that the Secretariat has taken into account in developing this design. In addition, we noted that we've not been able to fully sample the 4 CD and E area since the initial expansion in 2016. So we have only a single observation of that entire range. Of course, we had planned to sample extensively there in 2020, and then ended up with a truncated survey of not just this area, but others as well, due to the conditions in 2020. And then in 2021, again, intending to sample all of those stations, but not being able to do so for technical reasons on the water. As I noted yesterday, the other factors that have gone into our consideration of the northern Bering Sea edge are the observation of a northward range shift in that area, as well as the proximity to the edge of the convention waters. So we've seen in recent years, we've seen a number of species in the Bering Sea that have gone from being largely distributed in the Bering Sea to being, to some degree, transboundary stocks. This includes walleye pollock, Pacific cod, perhaps some of the crab stocks in the Bering Sea. And the Commission is looking forward to try and gather data now, potentially before we start to see this for Pacific halibut. And that's definitely one of the strong factors leading to our interest in sampling this entire area. We also presented earlier this week this design as well to the RAB, and noting that the RAB, paragraph 26, agreed that design 1 was the most appropriate given all the considerations that I've laid out. Now, we do recognize that we have on an ongoing basis some challenges, some feasibility challenges in recruiting enough vessels and dealing with weather and other factors to actually sample that whole area. So this design, design 2, was intended as a backup to design 1 if, for example, we fail to receive enough bids to sample the entirety of 4CD&E, or if logistical considerations due to weather and mechanical issues and others that we have had in the Bering Sea particularly lead to a reduced survey. So a bit more detail on the two designs, a little bit more than I had for you yesterday. Specifically, 100% sampling in 4CD&E corresponds to 140 survey stations. The reduced design, including only the southern portion of 4CD&E, would be 53 stations. Now you'll note that the total station counts of 1188 for design 1 and 1031 for design 2 differ by more stations than just those in the Bering Sea. And that's because in order to meet the same revenue target, as we do for other changes in the design and building out this design to meet our secondary objective, which is long-term revenue neutrality, we have added 70 additional stations outside of 4CD&E in order to balance the revenue projections from this survey. Those stations are added in proportion to expected revenue, as we've done for other additional stations spread across the core areas of the stock between IPHC Regulatory Area 2B and all the way out to IPHC Regulatory Area 3B. Noting that, unlike in previous designs, this year the Secretariat avoided adding additional stations where possible in the deepest zones in order to make things a little bit easier for the vessels that are operating in those areas. We tried to avoid adding additional stations in those deep waters, noting that some of those stations are required to meet our scientific goals. So in aggregate, the difference in the two designs is that from 1188 stations for design 1 down to 1031 for design 2, the projection would be that would correspond to a difference in landings from 676,000 pounds for design 1 in aggregate across the entire coast and down to 614,000 pounds if we were to go with design 2. So I think that's what I have for you on these designs. I'd be happy to answer any additional questions on them.
Travers?
Yes. So, Dr. Stewart, you started off your presentation on forecasts from last year's FIS, and I was just wondering, did we meet somewhere in that negative 200,000, or did we end up positive? What was the situation coming out of last year's FIS in terms of the neutrality financially?
Yes, through the chair, I'll take that one. We are still finalizing the figures for a couple of items, but it's safe to say that we are revenue positive for 2021 Fishery Independent Setline Survey by approximately $800,000 US. Thanks, Chair.
I would follow up on that. Sorry, I forgot I had one more slide for you here as well, just to illustrate the sensitivity in these projections. This slide shows the expected revenue across a range of different stock change across the top and price change along the left. And so you'll see the very large sensitivity to even small changes in price and stock trend. And this is what leads us generally to be somewhat conservative in not trying to necessarily target drawing down the entirety of a surplus from the previous year.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm out on this one. Thank you.
Dobson, Commissioner Ryall.
The presentation and the additional information. I recognize that it's hard to forecast, and the revenue, whether it be given the number of parameters that you move about. But do you feel that you're being particularly cautious in making the revenue projections for next year, given the stock kind of current trajectory? Like, why negative if given we had 800,000 positive for this year, give or take?
Thank you, Commissioner, for the question. It is, of course, challenging to project forward exactly what the conditions will be. You'll note that if we were to project forward under 0% stock change, which is certainly a plausible outcome based on the year, approximately revenue neutral at a price change of minus 2.5%. But even a modest dip in price, we've certainly seen a dip in price of up to 10% or even more in previous years, and noting that the price was pretty solid in 2021 could put us even deeper into the negative than we're projecting. I think this is probably a good illustration of why when we talk about revenue neutrality, we need to think about it in terms of multiple years and not just single year.
And if I may, as Dr. Wilson, I'll just chime in as well. And just to highlight that, for example, in the 2021 FIS, we did expect that there could be differences of plus or minus $500,000 for revenue in terms of expenses. And the fish price was unusually high, and we certainly didn't predict it. I don't think anybody predicted the 2021 fish prices increasing to the levels that they did, and that's what's resulted in the higher revenue, positive revenue for 2021. And I'll note in the prior years that the fluctuations in terms of what we budget versus what we receive each fiscal year has varied by plus or minus $500,000 in many cases, and this year was a particularly unusual year with some of the fish prices we saw being extremely high, especially towards the end of the season. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation, both Dr. Stewart and Dr. Wilson. I guess one other question, if I could, is that, and this is more clarification than a question, I suppose. Design 2, I think I heard you say, Ian, that it's a backup in case you can't get sample the full area, which either could be due to weather and or lack of bids. I guess, and that makes sense to me for sure. I guess maybe if you could just expand a little bit though on what the benefit is as far as doing this additional work. You mentioned the potential range shift. The collection of biosamples hadn't done since 2016. So how will this information help us going forward? Maybe just to expand a little bit more on that, if you could.
I think our biggest concern is that we would be having a range shift in northern Bering Sea that would allow additional connectivity with Russian waters. We've noted this as a point of scientific concern. Currently, when we do the stock assessment, we don't include any waters outside the convention area. And that assumption probably isn't too bad, given relatively low density along the boundary of the convention waters and relatively low potential for exchange due to that lower density. If we were to see a change in conditions in the Bering Sea and or a continuation of recent shifts, it could be that the density of halibut increase along that boundary. And I think that at some point we would begin to consider alternate ways to treat the stock assessment, whether that be including some of the Russian waters or other ways to try and address that. And given, I think that the trends that we've seen in the Bering Sea suggest that at some point this is going to become an issue. And I think our interest in sampling this area sooner rather than later is, one, to provide a baseline for future comparisons, and two, to try and detect as soon as possible if this is going on. We would not anticipate this degree of sampling to be an annual need. We've, as I mentioned, we haven't sampled the entirety of the Bering Sea edge since 2016. And so a 7-year gap in an area that's as critical as this does seem like a fairly long time until we get back to that area. It is a challenge because I want to be clear, we don't, the sampling is not required to meet our bias and variance targets. So this is really in response to what we perceive to be changing environmental and species distribution shifts in the Bering Sea.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, Paul. Commissioner DeGreef.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Stewart. And I can appreciate trying to run a for-profit thing that you plan for the worst and you hope for the best. So I do understand, having to, with your projected revenues, I think it's best to be slightly conservative, seeing how sensitive they are to price change and stock change. My question, though, is to do with the difference between FIS Optimization 1 and 2, and how you come about, how do you determine which stations to drop? Is it just modeled, like it's just random, or is there any determination to decide which stations you would technically drop, or would you change, skate length, or could you just go a little bit more into that?
I can. Thank you for the question, Commissioner. I'll start with the second part first, which is with regard to skates. And at current catch rates and bait prices and bid expenses for the Bering Sea, it is not feasible for us to fish more than 4 skates in the Bering Sea. So we have minimized in both of these designs the amount of gear that's being deployed in the Bering Sea. Catch rates have been low enough that it doesn't make sense to fish more skates there, unlike areas with higher catch rates. With regard to which stations to drop, so what we've prioritized here are, and now I'm showing you design 2, so this would be the fallback position. We are prioritizing in orange or yellow, depending on your screen, those stations that were not fished in 2021. So we were able to fish a number of those stations up along the very northwestern edge of the Bering Sea edge. And so this design merely tries to capture the stations that we missed in 2021.
That now from yesterday. I do know the fishery, right? I have heard that the fishery takes place more around some of the islands, and those won't be sampled in this design. Is that of any concern, or that's not actually where the stock lies, that's just where the fishery happens?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, the fisheries are highly concentrated in recent years, particularly around the islands, both in 4C around the Pribilofs as well in 4D around St. Matthew Island. However, that's not where we see the majority of the biomass distributed across the greater Bering Sea. Those islands tend to serve essentially as productivity magnets within a broad area that has relatively low density. Much of the Bering Sea shelf, southern and northern, is not at fishable densities of Pacific halibut necessarily for longline gear, but nonetheless adds up to a considerable amount of biomass. And I do note that what we're not showing here is we anticipate a NOAA Fisheries Trawl Survey to be conducted in 2022, which will provide us data across the shelf, both the southern and the northern shelf, as well as some information from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game survey in Norton Sound. So we will have, even in Design 2, even though it's fairly restricted to just the Bering Sea edge, we will have still considerable information, and we do anticipate that both of these designs would meet our bias and variance targets. So in either case, we will get a considerable amount of data in the Bering Sea. But that trawl surveys do not actually sample the Bering Sea edge, where they do have a few stations that come up around the islands.
You mentioned the leading edge, so you're talking about the northern leading edge, and how is that, like how do you decide that's as far as you want to test sample right now? That was just due to environmental factors, that's as far as you've ever seen halibut? Just curious there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, so we have been monitoring the distribution of halibut along this northern edge for some time now, I guess approaching 20 years with our survey, and even longer via the trawl survey information. We see halibut, I apologize, this map does not extend up to capture Norton Sound. We do see halibut right up through Norton Sound, essentially to the Bering Strait. And that is currently where we end the distribution of halibut. The end of the stations on this map correspond to the edge of the US-Russian EEZ boundary. So we currently cannot sample beyond that. Ideally, we would have some sampling on the Russian side to better understand the dynamics on both sides of the line. But as far as I know, there are no current surveys that are traversing that line for any species, although there have been some collaborative efforts in the past for species like walleye pollock. But right now, this corresponds pretty closely to an area of low density along that edge, given conditions in the last few years. We would expect, however, with warming waters in the Bering Sea, the potential for density to increase in the Bering Sea, and therefore the connectivity across that line to increase as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. This was helpful.
Effective on for
For breaking up there for me, I didn't hear everything you said. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, what I was thinking is that maybe I'd like to have a brief chance to communicate with some of my delegation about this, and so it won't take long, but I think we could do it during a break, so and then we can come back and make a decision. Great. Thanks, Glenn.
Great, thank you, Chair. So we'll pass to Dr. Hutchnazak, and if her presentation could be brought up, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So today I will give an update on the Pacific Halibut Multi-Regional Economic Impact Assessment, which is the core product of the IPHC economics program. To recall, the goal of the IPHC economic study, let me just actually turn on the camera first. To recall, the goal of the IPHC economic study is to provide stakeholders with an accurate and all-sector encompassing assessment of the economic impact of Pacific halibut resource in both Canada and the United States. This study brings the human dimension to the IPHC research framework, providing for an essential input to optimal management of Pacific halibut that is aligned with both the IPHC mandate as well as the socioeconomic objectives prevalent in the legislation of Canada and the United States. My plan for today is to focus on the latest set of results and ensure their correct interpretation. But before we go into that, I would like to briefly review the basics of the economic impact and go through various components that build the model. We have the commercial fishing and recreational fishing incorporated into the multi-regional economic impact assessment. I will also briefly describe how these play out in a multi-regional setting. I will also give you a short reminder on the model setup, and then I will move go through the results and dissemination of the results through the economic impact visualization tool, moving later to conclusions and recommendations. So let's start with the commercial sector. The sector's primary input to production is Pacific halibut. The sector, however, to produce landings also requires inputs from other industries. These industries supplying commercial fishing vessels with inputs rely on this demand when making their decision related to their production levels and expenditure patterns. For example, vessels making more fishing trips require more fuel or more gear. More demand for gear impacts also the gear manufacturers that in turn require additional inputs of plastic that is produced to produce that gear. Commercial fishing also creates employment opportunities, and the generated wages they contribute to the economy when they are put into circulation, and this further supports economic activity, which is very often a very important source of coastal communities' prosperity. This business-to-business transaction and inputs to household incomes also these create so-called indirect and induced economic impacts. Changes in the domestic supply of fish are also associated with production adjustments by industries that directly rely on the supply of fish. Processors specializing in processing Pacific halibut will be directly affected by changes in the Pacific halibut availability. Then this processing sector also requires input to production, and by demanding these inputs to production, it's creating additional economic impact. Processing sector also creates wages for their employees and profits that are contributing to the economy when they are spent. These two sectors and the impacts they create through demanding inputs to production is assessed using the model that is developed at the IPHC. And these are assessed primarily in terms of economic impact on households. The model is also supplemented by an analysis of a formation of price paid for Pacific Halibut products by their final users or consumers. This additional material is available in a separate paper linked here on the slide. You can see the information paper 4. This analysis recognizes that retailers and services, in this case, in case of Pacific Halibut, this would be restaurants, generate value added when supplying end users with Pacific Halibut products. This way, these industries contribute to the GDP of Canada and the United States. The fluctuation of Pacific Halibut supply, however, is unlikely to affect the gross revenue of these sectors in a linear fashion. Thus, we provide an estimate of the GDP contribution beyond the processing as a snapshot analysis that excludes backward linkages. When it comes to the recreational sector, note that businesses that rely on Pacific Halibut, when they are making purchases, they create demand for inputs supplied by other industries. And this would relate to inputs such as fuel bait, boat equipment, fishing trip provisions. These in turn generate demand for input needed by these industries. Guided fishing operations also create employment opportunities and generate profits. These wages and profits, when spent, support various other businesses that provide the products that those who rely on this wages and profits demand. What is more, anglers themselves contribute to the economy by creating demand for goods and services related to their fishing trips, both guided and unguided. These include, for example, expenditures on travel, lodging, expenditures through retailers, and spendings on fishing equipment. The latest revision of the model incorporates all these components. Although I would like to bring here a few words of caution, how much of the angling effort depends specifically on Pacific Halibut, that remains uncertain. The model uses information on the types of trips taken for in each region to assess this, but I hope to refine these estimates with the support of stakeholders and participants in these in the fisheries in this sector. Then the interlinked nature of the industries in the economy is also creating cross-regional impacts. Economic benefits generated by a natural resource can be retained in the area of resource extraction, but they can also leak to other regions. This happens when inputs to production are imported or wages are earned by non-residents and spent outside of the place of employment. Leaks can be also attributed to earnings from assets that are owned by non-locals. And this is particularly important in the context of Pacific Halibut and the quota ownership that is not necessarily held by residents. When it comes to the model setup, I will remind you that the model is designed to calculate economic impact for 3 Pacific Halibut producing regions, Alaska, West Coast, and British Columbia, but also 3 residual regions to account exactly for these cross-regional effects I was just talking about. This is particularly important in the context of a shared resource that spans between multiple regions, but is subject to joint management. All these sectors are built into a matrix-based model, so-called multi-regional social accounting matrix, which is the base for calculating economic impacts. This matrix describes not only the Pacific Halibut sectors, but also all other sectors in the economy to account for how these are interconnected between each other and how Pacific Halibut sectors are connected with other sectors in the economy. Note that while we develop the Pacific Halibut components for the model, the data on other sectors is sourced from external sources. These include Statistics Canada for Canada and the Bureau of Economic Analysis for the United States. Additionally, I will be presenting today results for more detailed model covering Alaska, and this will be focused on county level results. Describing results today, I would like to focus on Pacific Halibut contribution to households, and that is specifically impact on earnings and income. On that, I would like to first make a few introductory comments. Total output in any sector comprises of the cost of intermediate inputs, employee compensation, profit type income, and business taxes. All but the first category, these are components of the value added, which reflect the sector's contribution to the GDP of the region. Employee compensation and profit type income generate households' earnings that are first allocated based on the location of fishing activity. These earnings by place of work can be retained in the area of resource extraction, but can also contribute to the income elsewhere because of the leaks that I was describing. Now let me show you the estimates of earnings and income by region, noting that the earnings are by area where fish was landed, and income is by residence area of those who benefit from those earnings. So the income is what is either retained or what was the inflow of the earnings from other regions based on those cross-regional effects. The figure here summarizes the impact that covers all sectors included in the model. These are the commercial sector as well as the recreational sector. We have here specifically charter sector, which is shown with different colors. But the multipliers derived from the model are also used to estimate the economic impact related to angler expenditures on trips and durable goods, such as fishing equipment. These components reflect estimates for the whole recreational sector in general, including also unguided fishing. Since this figure includes many pieces, I would like to go through these one by one. But before, I will just note that the economic impact is most commonly expressed in terms of output, that is total production linked to the evaluated sectors, both directly and indirectly. Results in terms of output, as well as several other metrics, including compensation to employees, contribution to the GDP, or employment opportunities. These are other metrics that can be seen also through the interactive tool that I will mention later. Here, I would, however, like to focus on earnings and income, which reflect the contribution to households. Here first, I have highlighted direct earnings in each sector. This, as you might recall, includes compensation compensation of employees and profit type of income estimated for each sector. Here, these results might be somewhat counterintuitive, especially if you compare it with the economic impact in terms of output for each region. And the results here, the results in terms of impact on household, are driven by high profit margin estimated for British Columbia, which are reflected in the ratio of lease price to landing price. In 2019, the lease price in BC was on average 56% of the ex-vessel price, and this is down for nearly 90% in 2016. Moreover, over 60% of the quota is estimated to be subject to leasing. So this ratio is used to estimate the earnings within the sector, and that's why this blue bar for BC earnings on the graph that is representing the earnings. I also mark here the estimated income of quota owners derived from leasing, and this is the part of the blue bar that is marked with stripes. Now let's look at the earnings versus income adjustment following incorporation of cross-regional flows. These are particularly noticeable for Alaska, and these are associated with mainly with quota ownership. Note that about 40% of Alaska quota share units are reported as owned by residents of other states. The depicted here flows in the commercial for the commercial sector also reflect the portion of crew members that are employed by the sector but are non-residents. Although note that the share for the Pacific halibut fleet is considered to be much lower than the Alaska average, that is mainly driven by a larger share of non-resident employment that particularly in the large trawler sectors. This figure also incorporates the flows associated with a path of the landed fish all the way from the landing site to where the fisheries business license holder associated with processing is located. Note that nearly 60% worth of harvest purchased by shore-based processors was purchased by businesses that listed as a point of contact a location on the US West Coast. Similar patterns are actually also observed for the charter sector, and about 12% of charter halibut endorsements are registered using an address that is outside Alaska. The data on other regions indicate that the flows are also present, but they are not as pronounced, and these would be not visible on this figure. So the flows are particularly important to consider when assessing the economic impact of Alaska, when we are concerned more about how much of the benefit is retained within the region versus how much is generated to start with within that region. Here I would also like to note that the estimated investor share in British Columbia, this represents earnings that might be retained within the region, but these are earnings that are flowing to non-fishing stakeholders. Now let's move to the indirect and induced economic impact. Just to remind you, the indirect economic impact provides an estimate of changes related to demand for goods and services used in the production process of the directly impacted industries, as well as their suppliers. The induced economic impact includes economic activity generated by household spending earnings that rely directly on the impacted sectors. The highlighted bars represent the indirect and induced economic impact associated with commercial fishing, this including processing component of the value chain. These are separated into earnings that are retained within the region, as well as contribution to income that is leaking to other regions. This is the part of the bar that is marked with stripes. Note, and here what is really worth noting is the magnitude of the impact to non-Pacific halibut fishing region, particularly in the case of the United States. Yeah, and these are the flows that are marked here. So the part of the flow that is running directly to the area where the fish was harvested, and part of that earnings that are outflowing to the other regions. And here we have some statistics that are related to the flows of the earnings within the commercial fishing sector. And these are the statistics for quota ownership in Alaska. Similar effects can be also depicted for the recreational, for the charter sector. And here by charter, I mean more broadly, businesses offering recreational fishing activity as a service, as opposed to private fishing activities. And here as well, part of that earnings are flowing or are retained within the region where the fishing occurred, but some of that will be outflowing to other regions. And this is related to the ownership of a business, but also import of products that were used in the production. Here in this figure is its depiction of those flows that have the major impact. And here we have the flows in terms of number of endorsed anglers in Alaska. The last four components on the figure, these depict the impact of anglers on the economy that occur through their expenditures on trips and also expenditures on durable goods. And this is specifically the share that is attributed to Pacific halibut. The first two represent economic impact that is occurring locally, thus retained within the harvest region, while the last two are the impact elsewhere or income within the indicated region relies as a result of fishing elsewhere. And these are the impacts on income that are particularly important when we look at the magnitude of these impacts in the regions that are not Pacific halibut producing regions. Now the table here summarizes the results of between both sectors. Here, besides the total impact, we can also compare multipliers, that is the impact in dollars per dollar of output, as well as impact per pound of removals. The model results suggest that Pacific halibut commercial fishing total estimated impact on households, this amounts to about $185 million. The recreational sector adds to the economic impact of Pacific halibut about $145 million. This translates into less impact on households from the recreational sector in comparison with the commercial sector when looking at the impact per dollar of landed value for the commercial sector and dollars spent for the recreational sector. And this is not surprising when considering that commercial sector supports not only the suppliers that provide inputs to that sector, but also these forward-link industries such as processors. Then a somewhat different picture emerges when comparing economic impact per pound of removals. This measure is higher for the recreational sector, and this is driven mainly by considerable spendings on recreational fishing. And this is mainly because a lot of these spendings come from people who are visiting and bring those additional and spend a lot of additional money also in their place of residence because of demand for the fishing trips. Note that the last two lines here are sensitive to the assumption about the share of recreational effort that depends on the Pacific halibut, and we'll be seeking refinement of these based on the inputs from the stakeholders. This analysis should be also not used as an argument in sectoral allocation discussions. This intends to really be a snapshot assessment, and it does not reflect the implications of shifting demand-supply balance. Note that participation in sport fishing do not typically scale in linear fashion with changes to harvest limits. Here we have also something from the latest update of the model, and these are community or county level estimates for Alaska. The model informs on the county level economic impacts, highlighting regions where communities might be particularly vulnerable to changes in the access to Pacific halibut resource. Note that a good understanding of these localized effects is really important to policymakers who are often concerned with households' welfare. Fisheries policies have a long history of disproportionately hurting the smaller communities, often because the potential adverse effects were not sufficiently assessed. Looking at the map here, we have a very clear depiction of a variation in the economic impact between counties. The figure here also shows a comparison between the value of landings and direct earnings as a percent of the total, for few counties that are few selected counties. Note that the counties that might some of the counties might account for a large or really considerable share of landings, and this is the first bar, the blue one, but might not necessarily retain much of the earnings within that region. And this is the percent that is depicted here with the red bar. On the other hand, some counties might derive income from Pacific halibut, but do not necessarily serve as a Pacific halibut entry point to the market. Here, for example, look at the anchorage that is deriving income from a Pacific halibut, but is not a county that would be associated with landings. The well-being and resilience of fishery-dependent communities depends really on the state of the available fishery resource, but also the extent to which community residents are vested in the fishery through ownership of quotas, and how benefits from landed fish are distributed. And this is really clear here that these economic impacts would not be evenly distributed, even if the change in the stock would be proportional. Well, I focused in this presentation mainly on the impacts on households, and this is because this is the most meaningful metric to the general population. The economic impact can be also expressed in with various other metrics or be derived just for a limited number of sectors. And for that reason, the model is supplemented by the economic impact visualization tool, which disseminates the full set of the model results. And the app here really highlights the spatial variation of the economic impacts and the importance of considering these cross-regional flows when assessing the dependence of regions on Pacific halibut. And here we have a snapshot of this app, but please, you can interact with this app on your own using the link that is included in the presentation. The app also comes with a manual that is guiding the use of the app, as well as serve as a guide to interpret the results that are presented through this app. So to conclude, the model is designed to give a comprehensive understanding of a broad scope of economic impact of Pacific halibut resource, both to the economies of Canada and the United States. The results suggest that the revenue generated by direct Pacific halibut sectors accounts for only a fraction of economic activity that would be foregone if the resource was not available to fishers and other users. This understanding of the complex interactions between sectors and regions is particularly important to management of a resource that spans a wide geographical area. But we can also see from the model that these impacts are highly heterogeneous and vary between regions and sectors. Improving the spatial resolution of the model is helpful in understanding the local impacts of changes in the state of the Pacific halibut stock throughout its range, highlighting really the regions that are particularly vulnerable to changes in the availability of a Pacific halibut, and depending on the economic activities that really rely on this resource. Moving forward, I would just mention that this model is a core product of the IPHC socioeconomic program that directly responds to the Commission's need for more comprehensive economic information to support the overall management of the Pacific halibut resource in fulfillment of its mandate. This program, as well as this model, is really intended to build a base understanding of the socioeconomic impacts of Pacific halibut and can be used to evaluate various questions that the Commission might have in association with various other decisions that are part of the mandate and that are considered at any time. The model really contributes to the wholesome approach to the Pacific halibut management that is optimal from both biological and socioeconomic perspective. And while we have incorporated various new components since the presentation at the last annual meeting, there are various tasks that would enhance the model usability to the Commission and contribute to also research integration at the IPHC. And these are included in the IPHC 5-year program of integrated science and research. And with that, I will just wrap up with noting the recommendation for the commission that includes the recommendation to simply note the paper that provides an update on the development of the Pacific Halibut multi-regional economic impact assessment. Thank you.
Sector direct investors, and that shows where I assume that's what you're defining as leasing. I noticed in Alaska there is no, you were not able, there is no indirect. Is that because of the owner-operator provisions, or because I have heard that folks that become ill, they have to get someone else to, run their boat or fish their allocation. So it's just curious, is that actually a zero number for the amount of value that goes to what you're defining as investors?
Thank you, Commissioner Degree, for this question. And yes, I do not specifically define the investor part for Alaska because of the owner on board requirement, and the provisions for these unusual cases where the owner does not have to be present, they are not as common. However, the flow of earnings that is presented here, in here, this would incorporate the flow that is going to other regions that is associated with the quota ownership by non-residents. The difference here is that the quota ownership is flowing to other regions in case of Alaska, while in British Columbia, this is typically staying within the region, but it is flowing to those non-fishing stakeholders.
Here, I'm curious because I know pretty much all quota has some value to it. It takes some sort of part of earnings. But I would, are you suggesting that means this is to people that aren't on the boat, so non-owner operators? Is that correct? That 61% goes to non-owner operators? I'm just trying to understand what that statement's saying.
So this 61% reflects the latest data point available, and it represents all the quota that switched the ownership throughout the season. So it was there was a transaction associated with this quota. This does not necessarily mean it's only it's not only the quota that was sorry, let me go back. Yes, this is the quota that switched the ownership that is assessed based on the latest point of data available.
or leasing or whatnot.
Yes, that is correct. This does not include any sold quota. These are the quotas that exchanged hands temporarily, and there was and we assume that the average price for leasing would be associated with these transactions.
Question, slide 19. Sorry, it just helps for me to see the visual. Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, so slide 19, lots of information here. One thing so you have economic investment on house or impacts on households. For commercial, you have it at 185.2 for Alaska. I did read your the info paper 4, and in that you concluded that the economic impact was 460 million for all of U.S. Why the difference? Is that because that went to retail and this is not going to retail?
So I apologize first that this actually includes the economic impact on households in all regions. So Alaska was assessed first, and then we added also additional regions. So that will be the total. But the difference here you're referring to is the difference in economic impact, which is all the production that is associated with the impact on the direct sectors, and this here is the economic impact on households. So the impact only on the components that relates to the compensation of employees and the profit types of income. That's why the difference. Here, I apologize. This is including also the impact on British Columbia and West Coast. But again, in terms of impact on households, not the impact in terms of output.
Oh, okay, I got you. Thank you for that, and that's it for me. Thank you.
And if I just may, if you're interested in economic impacts in terms of any other metrics, these are available in the app. So I focus here on the economic impact on household as the metrics I consider most interesting to the general public, but this can be measured in different terms depending on really the priorities of management that might be in place.
Perfect. Thank you again, Dr.
For the very detailed report. So there's a lot of good information here, but I'm again struggling to kind of understand that in terms of decision making when it's at this. I'm sure it's not to you, but to me, very fine detail. So, like Alan has done in other reports like MSC and Ian has done and work on the decision table. There's kind of metrics that kind of group things in some kind of fashion, like either given a metric, a value, which can be compared more easily, I guess, and can be backed up by all this data. But stacking graphs like this and trying to compare things between regions and countries, to me, it's hard to understand. So my first comment is there going to be some way that we could digest this information into metrics that are more easily defined and comparable or evaluated by lay persons like myself? So that's my first question, and maybe you can respond to that.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Yamada, for this question. And this is a very valid point. So how I see it is really at this time, we're really building this broad understanding of the economic impact of Pacific halibut that takes into consideration the various pathways how this resource is contributing to economy of both contracting parties. Now, what kind of decisions you would like to inform with these results? This is, of course, up to the Commission to guide what kind of questions they would have, they would like to have answered with the use of this model and this assessment. So I am happy to discuss any additional ways how to present these results and how to provide the useful metrics that would be helpful for you to support the management. But this again is really related to could be much more helpful when there's a specific question that you would like to have answered and would like to have a better idea of how this impacted in terms of what is the socioeconomic impact. And one important and interesting example here was, for example, the size limit analysis that provided some preliminary look at how the economics can support management. And this would be the type of question that could be explored with the use of this model that at this time provides you with more general understanding of what is the overall contribution of Pacific halibut resource to the economy of contracting parties.
Thank you. Yeah, so I understand that we might have to provide a little bit more guidance to you so that the information can be provided to us in a more understandable fashion that could help us in any kind of decisions based upon socioeconomics. Yeah, that's a fair response. So my second question is regarding how this. So somehow I think Ian's presentation said that this is a component. I'm not quite sure where this this fits in. Is it currently being put into the model, or is it planned to be put into the model? And so if it's put into the model, does this eventually bleed out into distribution of the TCY? So I'm kind of confused as to, what role the socioeconomic inputs are affecting currently what we do.
Thank you, Commissioner Yamada, for this question. At this time, the stock assessment is providing guidance to the management decision solely in terms of biological component. We provided this additional biosocioeconomic index as an additional input for you to understand how the conditions for the fishery at this time, mostly looking at the commercial fishery, are changing over time, just to provide additional guidance of how the things have been changing to the sector and potentially where we stand in comparison with the last couple of years, considering that the users of the stock or fishers, they make typically multi-year investments, and to understand where they stand in terms of conditions they've been experiencing over the last couple of years. So this is something that we've provided to you for the first time this year as an additional detail that can be helpful in kind of building the context in which the stock assessment is kind of embedded into, and the context in which you make the decisions. But this is not providing a direct input to the stock assessment or the estimates of the potential allocations between the regulatory areas.
So a follow-up, do you feel that someday there'll be as robust a model or a system similar to what we do with the biological stock assessment, like the decision table, that would parallel that, like a decision table on socioeconomics, that we would also look at and derive and add to our decision on how we distribute TCUI?
Thank you, Commissioner Yamada, for this question. If you look at the general trends in the stock assessment work, you might come across something that is called the next generation of a stock assessment enterprise. And these documents, they are mainly coming from actually NOAA fisheries. They suggest that the socioeconomic drivers, an inclusion of those socioeconomic drivers could be helpful in building more robust stock assessment that accounts for motivations within each sector and influence aspects such as catchability, distribution of harvest, selectivity, and these type of elements of the fishery that understanding these elements might be helpful in better calibrate a stock assessment. This is, of course, still a very preliminary stage, and this is more of a concept at this time. But without building this understanding of what are the socioeconomic impacts of the resource, how they are distributed, whether they're affecting regions equally, or there are these heterogeneity of those impacts, without building this understanding, thinking about how this might be driving the fisheries, the motivation, the fisheries. Without that, there would be no option to go this pathway. So over time, yes, there is a way to do it, but this would require much additional work before it could be implemented. But again, this is considered as a potential way forward, and within the stock assessment kind of research framework considered widely around the world.
Thank you very much. Your comments were very helpful.
A much smaller question. It was on slide 11. I wondered how you were able to estimate the leasing costs going back over that number of years well, actually, maybe I should clarify. I think this graph was just specific to BC. But I could be wrong. But I wondered how you had generated the estimates of leasing costs for this graph.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis, for this question. I have some feedback. Okay, now it's good. So yes, this graph represents the estimates for British Columbia only, and these are reflecting only Pacific halibut. These values are provided annually through the report that is commissioned by the DFO and available online. So these are data points available from the report that are just graphed here for year-to-year comparison.
Yes, thanks, Chair. There is certainly one question specifically related to this agenda item and one to the FIS design evaluation. Would you like to take both of those, Chair, or simply the one related to this item at the moment, and then when we come back at the break, talk about the FIS design question? Great, thank you very much. Secretariat, if you could just bring up the questions. I'll ask or cite the second question at the moment, which is directly related to this item, and then we'll come back to the other one immediately following. So while that's being uploaded, it'll just take a moment or two. The question is from Linda Bankin from Alpha. So it says, can Dr. Hutchinson talk a bit more about particularly vulnerable communities? What creates that vulnerability and how management decisions might affect that vulnerability? So I'll pass to Dr. Hutchinson to respond. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. So the estimates of the vulnerability to the communities, currently this is assessed based on how much of the economic benefit each county is retaining. So what I have seen in the available data, particularly for Alaska, is that many counties, there's a big disproportion between how much fishery is landed within the county and how much of the benefit is retained with that county. And this is related to a few components. The main one is the residence of the quota owners, and this will be because if the owner of the quota, even though has to be present on board, if he resides normally outside of Alaska or outside of this county, it would contribute to the economy mainly in the area where he resides. The further components that build these estimates are related to the processing capacity. This relates to how much of the landings were landed versus how much of the output from the processing was going through that county. So as you know that not all the landings are processed in the same right away in the same area, and a lot of the processing profits would be related to the companies that are not based in the county that is there. So all these components together, they build this this map that I presented today that shows the percentage of total landings within Alaska versus the percentage of the earnings that are retained within that county. And I see it as a potential input that would guide how much the counties could potentially be gaining from the Pacific halibut landings, and as well as which counties have a particular interest in the stock and its condition, because how much of the earnings they get from the fisheries that are dependent on Pacific halibut.
Thank you, Dr. Hutchinson. The additional question we have is from Don Lane related to agenda item 5.3 on the FIS design evaluation, and I'll read this and then respond. Have other revenue sources been explored for the FIS in Bering Sea? It seems that Area 3A and 2C quota holders are funding a large portion of the research budget due to the 8 skates set in those areas, with only 4 skates set in low productive areas. Exploring the EZ boundary and the Bering Straits for migration north of halibut due to climate change is a valid question and deserves research. However, the trend is for IPHC to go to the bank found in 3A and 2C halibut stocks. Other revenue sources for climate change related research may be available to take some this developing financial burden. So I'll just provide a general response in terms of how we fund the Fishery Independent Setline Survey, and then also pass to Dr. Stewart or even Dr. Webster to talk a little bit in more detail about the design. Regarding how we've utilized the Commission's resources over recent years to specifically look at the extremities of the stock, if you cast your mind back when we did the expansion series, that expansion series was funded by a substantial carryover in the Commission's funds. That money was exhausted a couple of years ago as we completed the expansion series. And so at that time, we weren't specifically looking at trying to seek revenue neutrality, but rather draw down that budget surplus. We're now at the point where we do need to try and move towards long-term revenue neutrality. And as you'll see with the proposal for option 1 and also option 2, there is still a negative expected balance of $200,000, which will be utilized from the carryover for the specific Fishery Independent Setline Survey Fund. And so part of it is certainly being funded by the carryover for that particular fund. And then we seek to ensure that the overall costs for monitoring the stock coastwide are set to head towards revenue neutrality in the long term. And so I'll pass to Dr. Stewart just to talk a little bit about how we apply the 8 skates, 6 skates, 4 skates coastwide and some of the implications. Thanks. Over to you, Dr. Stewart.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Wilson. With regard to skates, that calculation is just based on the relative expense of getting the vessel bids in place, getting the vessels to that location, and providing enough bait to fish those skates. The scientific design requires a minimum of 4, and we only apply additional skates where that is going to be revenue effective. I will note that the goal of the Commission, the stated tertiary goal of the Commission, is to reduce the footprint to the degree possible in each year. And post-rationalization, both of these designs are actually below the approximately 1,200 station footprint that we have historically fished across many, many years. And so we are starting to see the benefit of the rationalized design in reducing the overall number of stations. However, we are still in somewhat of a challenging situation overall with regard to the combination of price and catch rates that we've experienced in recent years. I'll note that in all years of the survey, if we were to only sample regions that were strictly revenue neutral within that region, we would not be able to meet our minimum scientific standards. And then finally, just to note that although this particular discussion is focused on IPHC regulatory area 4, C, D, and E, the stock assessment is utilizing data from all areas, and all areas certainly depend on one another with regard to the quality of the estimates of stock distribution. And so therefore, all areas benefit from better scientific information, even if that information is coming from one area or another in a particular year.
Two B to 3B, is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. That is correct. The additional skates and stations are only applied in areas where the projection is for a positive revenue, and that in recent years, that's extended all the way from IPHC regulatory area 2B out to include 3B in the Western Gulf of Alaska and all the areas in between.
Okay, thank you. How do you determine how to spread those across the core area?
Thank you for the question. We begin with the higher catch rate areas, but apply some level of increase across that entire zone. We also added an additional consideration based on feedback from our survey skippers on the challenges of fishing additional skates in deep water. This year we added an additional constraint to reduce the use of 8 skate sets at stations that are in deep water. And because we don't mix and match number of skates within a charter region, we did then not add additional stations in deep water in any of these areas where we could avoid doing so.
Okay. Have you being the secretary, decided on the spread of those stations across the core areas at this point for either option 1 or 2?
Be clear, this isn't a selection of stations. We estimate the fraction of the total sampling stations that are needed, and then this is produced via randomized design, selecting from within the complete 1,890 station design. We take a random draw within each of these regions. And so the 2 maps that are shown are the actual stations that will be proposed to be fished in the upcoming designs. And those were selected once we've found the rate of sampling by station. Those were selected in a random fashion within those areas.
Right, sorry, I misspoke, yeah. But do you have a table, I guess, Dr. Stewart, of what the number of stations are in each of the areas? I'm sure it is somewhere, but I don't recall seeing it.
Yes, we do. And that, I assume that will be all available. I mean, certainly when the bid specs go out, that level of information, including the specific stations and station numbers for planning by the people planning to make bids on that, will certainly be available.
Okay, so it's not available currently.
I don't think so.
Okay. Thanks very much. That's all the questions I have, Glenn.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner. We've undertaken adding the additional stations in a general sense across all of these designs, and so I haven't tracked the specific distribution. In fact, we didn't isolate these 2 designs separately with regard to where to put those stations. The allocation of additional stations was made charter region by charter region basis. But yes, correct, most on Alaskan waters. Yes, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe you'd be correct. Most of those stations likely fall in Alaskan waters.
In the break, and we would support option 1. I think you've already stated that the U.S. is on that page as well. We would like to, don't need to know it at this meeting, but would like to have some further understanding of how the additional skates would be distributed across the core areas and how that's decided. But as I said, I don't think we need to get into that at this meeting right now, Glenn, given Ian's answer earlier.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And we would add in that additional request for information on how the additional stations will be distributed coast-wide. Thanks, Chair. That's correct, Chair. Thank you. Great, thank you, Chair. So if we could have that presentation brought up, please, for agenda item 10, and Dr. Hutchinson will walk us through. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will present now IPHC fishery regulatory proposals for the 2021-2022 process as agenda item 10. So just a short reminder, IPHC fishery regulations for 22 are currently subject to consideration. The proposals can be submitted through the IPHC fishery regulations portal. This is available on the IPHC website, and this is the 4th year of fully electronic submission of these proposals. Deadline for the IM proposals has already passed, but I will note the deadline for the upcoming annual meeting, and this is the it's 25th December 2021. And I would also note that stakeholders might also submit statements up until the day before the annual meeting. So in terms of IPHC Secretariat fishery regulation proposals, we have 3. First, the first 2 of them, these are related to mortality and fishery limits, and this is section 5 of the IPHC regulations, and commercial fishing periods, section 9. These are just as standard placeholders at this time, and this will be populated at the annual meeting. That at least that would be expected. The proposal 3, these are minor amendments that have been prepared in collaboration with contracting parties, and these are intended to improve clarity and consistency in the IPHC fishery regulations. There's nothing substantial in terms of interpretation. This is mainly improvements in terms of capitalizations and the use of acronyms through the whole document. In terms of proposals B, these are contracting party fishery regulations proposals. We have a proposal B1, which relates to record keeping for charter Pacific halibut annual limits, and section 29. And I believe we have Alicia Miller and Doug Duncan on the line who would like to speak to this proposal.
Good morning, Chair, members of the Commission. This is Doug Duncan from NOAA Fisheries with the U.S. delegation. Can everybody hear me? Sure. So I'll just give a very brief summary of our proposal B1. This is a minor and mostly administrative proposal that addresses the annual harvest record keeping requirement when an annual limit for Pacific halibut is in place in all Alaska regulatory areas. So it deals with the harvest record card that recreational anglers need to keep and complete when an annual limit for Pacific halibut is in place. And so what this proposal does is it makes the general requirements for that harvest record card part of the general provisions in section 29 of the IPHC regulations. Currently they're added or removed in each year when an annual limit is put in place. This would just make them a standing part of the regulation, so they don't need to be, or the requirements related to them don't need to be modified in each year. Whether or not an annual limit is in place in a given regulatory area would still be determined each year through the council's recommendation to the commission. This just makes the specific requirements for those harvest records a standing part of the regulations. So that's one component of this proposal. The second component of this proposal authorizes the use of electronic harvest records. Currently, it was determined that only a paper harvest record could be used under the previous regulations that have been adopted in these Alaska regulatory areas. And during this period, the state of Alaska and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game has moved towards an electronic harvest record card for their state managed fisheries. So the second element of this would also authorize that electronic harvest record card to be used to fulfill this requirement for the recreational halibut fishery. And with that, I will pause and take any questions.
Turn to commissioners and see if there are any questions on this proposal. Commissioner Davis.
Electronic harvest records, that's a topic of interest in BC for recreational fisheries, and so I think there could be some value in comparing notes, and if Doug was willing, maybe just identifying sort of points of contact for a follow-up on that topic.
Sure, I could put some forward. I think that the Alaska Department of Fish and Game has been really leading that effort in Alaska regulatory areas. So any members of the department, I think would be a good go-to. I think we've interacted with Tom Tauby, and I would be happy to send you contact information for him or others involved in that on the Alaska side.
Commissioner Yamada.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Yamada. This is generally all recreational anglers, although only an annual limit has been in place for the guided sector previously.
So I'd like to add also a good reference would be Jim Hasbrook with Department of Fish and Game. Electronic data reporting requirements right now. just for your information, Neil. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, yes, it is December 25th. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The next standard regulatory proposal, the B2 proposal, was not submitted, but it is related to charter management measures in IPHC regulatory areas 2C and 3A, and this would be expected ahead of the annual meeting. But again, it's not part of the record at this time. Moving to stakeholders' fishery regulation proposals, these were not submitted, at least not the proposals that would be relevant to regulations. We, however, received a number, specifically 3 statements on fishery regulations proposals from stakeholders. And these would be more related to the decisions that are more within the mandate of the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council. But I would like to highlight here just the topics that were mentioned in those statements, noting that full statements are available in the information paper on the IPHC website for the within the interim meeting documents. So the subjects that were considered were commercial bottom trawling, and specifically the interest in limiting bottom trawls to areas deeper than 400 feet and this was noting socioeconomic considerations for the local communities. Another statement was related to bag limits or potential bag limits for non-resident unguided anglers in the regulatory area 2C. And the third statement was related to the inclusion of AAT fleet Pacific Halibut Bay Catch 6 ratio in the stock assessment, as well as in general Pacific Halibut Bay Catch limits for the AAT fleet. And this concludes my presentation on the regulatory proposals. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll also chime in. We did just receive this morning the letter from the Pacific Fisheries Management Council with those proposed dates, and noting that there's not going to be a change from last year. the regulations that have been in place for 2021. The intention is to incorporate those into Proposal A2. Noting that, as I just indicated, at the moment the Council is not proposing any changes to the dates. So, thank you, Chair.
On agenda item 10. Okay, seeing none, are there any additional public comments on this agenda item?
Chair, no, there is not.
Given that, I think we can.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So we will move to 11.1, and so if the Secretary could bring up the associated paper, which is paper 16. Okay, so thank you very much. Paper 16 is the draft rules of procedure amendments that are being proposed. If you cast your mind back to the last annual meeting, IM097 request 08, the Commission requested that the Secretariat undertake an intersessional review and recommend further improvements to the IPHC rules of procedure to the Commission, noting the Conference Board's recommendation to change when chairs are elected in the rule, and that was from the previous Conference Board meeting that weren't incorporated into the 2021 edits. The Processor Advisory Board, noting the conflicting texts in the rules and roles of the Commission's Secretariat. And so provided at Appendix 1 of this document are three terms of reference, rules of procedure for subsidiary bodies: the Conference Board, the Processor Advisory Board, and the Research Advisory Board. You heard earlier yesterday the endorsement of the amendments from the Research Advisory Board to their terms of reference. As I indicated, the Conference Board has already approved the amendments at their last Conference Board meeting in January of this year. And we have been working with the Processor Advisory Board over the course of this year to consider a range of other amendments. And I will make it clear that while we have undertaken consultation, this is an ongoing process, and those that are provided in Appendix 1 of this document are very much draft, and we are meeting with various representatives from the Processor Advisory Board to get their input prior to the upcoming PAB meeting. And so, Chair, at this point, noting that the rules of procedure won't be adopted until the annual meeting, this is just for information at this point in time, noting that there's ongoing consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Any comments or questions from other commissioners?
Thank you very much, Chair. The next paper is paper 19, please. And this is on the report of the independent auditors and financial statements for financial year 2021. Just a bit of a lag here while that paper 19 is brought up. Okay, maybe while paper 19 is being brought up, I'll just start to speak to it. It's a relatively brief update. The intention of paper 19 is just to keep the Commission informed of the process for the completion of the independent external auditor's report for financial year 2021, as per Regulation 14 of the IPHC's financial regulations. So to give you a little bit of background, in accordance with those regulations, on the 5th of October, the existing 3-year contract with Moss Adams to undertake our annual statement audit was confirmed through the engagement letter signing for professional services. Subsequently, on the 25th of October, and in accordance with paragraph 2 of Regulation 14, the Secretariat commenced the provision of the initial provided by client list to the independent external auditor 25 days after the end of the fiscal year, noting that the regulations only require 60 days, so we're well in advance of that schedule. On the 1st of November, Moss Adams commenced the auditing process, and we are expecting the final report to be provided by the 19th of December. I did receive a draft of that audit yesterday, and so we're certainly well on track for, again, providing the financial audit for 2021 on time. And noting that that will be presented to commissioners at the Finance and Administration Committee, which will meet on the first day of the commission meeting. The same deadline is the 25th of December for the provision of that document, but we're expecting to get that up much earlier. At this point, there is certainly no issues that are arising that I can provide early awareness of, and so it certainly looks like we're on target. And so we're simply asking the Commission to note that process that's ongoing in accordance with the financial regulations. Thanks, Chair. Yes, thanks, Chair. So the document itself is the one that's on screen at the moment. You may have to zoom in a little bit, so it's listed as document 19, but I think you're correct. It should be 17.
Ryle?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Dr. Wilson, I think in the past we had a couple of years that were late that caused us some financial challenges or a fine. Those have been rectified, is that correct?
That's correct, Chair. They have, Vice Chair, they have been fully rectified in the previous fiscal year, and we are on track again for the second year running. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Dr. Wilson, I have a question. You mentioned the surplus we had from last year's FIS, and I'm just wondering, do we have a balance sheet where it's designated for FIS surpluses, or how do we account for that in our ledger?
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Commissioner Alverson. So through the Chair, that's one of the advantages of the new fund accounting system that we've implemented over the last couple of years. And so, for example, specifically for Fund 40, we carried into the end of the 2029 fiscal year a balance of $182,000 approximate dollars into Fund 40. In 2020, the Fishery Independence Survey was revenue positive by $56,000, which meant that carrying at the start of fiscal year 2021, it was the combination of those two. So we carried into the start of fiscal year 2021 $263,000. At the end of fiscal year 2021, we were in the black approximately $803,000 for the 2021 FIS, which means that we're carrying a balance of $1,066,000 for the FIS fund itself. And this is something that is provided also as the financial statements as part of the auditing process, and you'll be receiving those with the auditor's independent report very shortly. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, that's good, great news. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And so document 18, if we could just bring it up, and I think that was the confusion with that 17-19 issue previously. So if we could just have document 18. And so again, this is just to provide the Commission with a very brief update on how we are progressing and the plan for the fiscal year 2022 budget. It's obviously very early days, only a couple of months into the fiscal year, but for the Finance and Administration Committee meeting at the end of January, we'll provide the first quarterly update on the income versus expenses for FY 2022. As I indicated earlier yesterday, we have already received the full contributions from both Canada and the United States of America, both received on the same day. And that money is obviously going to ease any cash flow issues or concerns that we may have had previously. One of the elements that I did want to bring to your attention, though, is that noting that the Fishery Independent Setline Survey design budget is approved in the prior year, and yet it is highly reliant on fish prices and bid costs, and also the final survey design that is adopted by the Commission in fiscal year. We will need to be providing you with a revised, updated Fund 40 budget for consideration and endorsement at the Finance and Administration Committee meeting in late January, rather. It's worth noting, of course, that the Fund 40 is independent of the contracting party contributions, and thus any amendment to reflect the design that will be eventually implemented in 2022 will not result in an adjustment for those contributions, noting that they've already been paid as well. So in that regard, it's simply asking the Commission to note that we will be providing a updated budget for Fund 40 for adoption at the FAC 98. And that's all I have on this item as well. Thank you, Chair. Chair. So they're actually from a number of sources depending on how they are placed. For example, we are going to be receiving additional funds from research bodies that will be incorporated into this line item and haven't been broken down, and they would go into Fund 20 on research, so to fulfill the science program. Otherwise, the other elements that we're expecting are, as you say, from NOAA Fisheries for the port sampling grant, from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife to pay for the additional survey stations off the Washington coast. And I think that's the summation of what we have presented here at the moment. So it's from those three sources. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Alverson, through the chair. When it comes down to it, everything falls on me. However, we do have Tina Wisnowski, who joined us some months ago as our staff accountant. In addition to that, just as a reminder that we have Somerville and Associates as our contracted accounting firm, and they have 3, sometimes 4 staff who work in association with us to work on our accounts, ensure the IRS forms are submitted, and also to work with our auditing firm, Moss Adams. So in short, we have 1 full-time staff member, Tina, who's our staff accountant and has been with us for a few months now, and then also 3 to 4 staff from Somerville and Associates, our dedicated accounting firm. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question through the chair. So that's actually a good point, and I appreciate it that you've raised it. It reminds me to talk about that, noting that this is the budget that was adopted at the 11th special session. I'm going to say that was in June of this year. And we were still working through how to allocate the various expenses, particularly for salaries and wages, based on this new fund accounting scheme that we're applying. What you see represented here, so for example, the $85,000 for 20 research is to do with the salaries, expenses associated with the research grants that we were going to be receiving. What we've ended up doing throughout the course of 2021 is allocate the broader salaries and wages, which is listed as $2.925 million here, under 10 general. We are now allocating those directly to the individual funds. And so what you will see as part of the independent auditor's financial statement is that the salaries, which were previously for those within the science research arm and being accredited to 10 general, will now be reflected in the relevant fund, in this case 20 research. So in short, no, this number 85 does not represent the actual scientific staff salaries that are going to be accredited to 20 research. And that is something that we will also provide an update on at the Finance and Administration Committee. Thank you, Chair. Great, thank you very much, Chair. So there's no particular paper for agenda item 12. It's just providing an initial update on where we are with our planning processes for the annual meeting and the associated subsidiary bodies. And then also, as I highlighted at the start of this meeting, have a general discussion amongst commissioners and stakeholders who are interested to weigh in on a potential either face-to-face or hybrid or fully electronic meeting of the Commission at the end of January 2022. So as a general update, very recently we secured the meeting venue, noting that that was the previous direction. It was to prepare for a potential face-to-face meeting. And so the meeting at the moment is slated to be held at the Hyatt Regency in Bellevue, Washington, for the 5 days of the Commission meeting and the subsidiary bodies. How we are going to proceed is obviously something that's up for discussion and very much dependent on the current COVID-19 pandemic operating environment that we find ourselves in. but we are certainly making all preparations and testing our systems so that should the commission decide to have a face-to-face meeting, whether it be partial or full commission meeting, we're fully prepared. And we've been doing that both at the recent work meeting of the commission and also for this recent research advisory board meeting on Monday and the interim meeting. So we're putting in place a number of practices and protocols to ensure or to maximize safety as much as possible for in-person participation should the commission decide that's the case. Examples that we are implementing are obviously the social distancing components, but also various vaccination requirements. And so the staff are currently in the Grand Hyatt in Seattle, testing both our operating systems, how we can connect in a hybrid system where we have participants, in this case the commissioners remotely, and then a number of participants in person. These are all things that we will need your direct feedback on in terms of what you are comfortable with. Should there be a face-to-face meeting in whatever format that may be, noting we would also need to respect the both federal and state restrictions and requirements here in Washington. We are working closely with the hotel to determine what they are in terms of proof of vaccination requirements to enter the meeting spaces, and that's something that we'll need to provide you with so that you can make an informed decision. In terms of a potential cutoff date for having a face-to-face meeting in whatever format that is, I'm just trying to remember what the current contract says in terms of when we need to provide final indication of rooming arrangements and the like. So with that, Chair, I'm happy to pass back to yourself and the other commissioners to provide initial feedback and on how you'd like to proceed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. And if I may, I just have a couple of quick follow-up questions, and then I'll turn to my fellow commissioners for any questions. So do we have a clear date when we need to make the decision for contracting purposes with the hotel?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So we have signed the contract this past week to secure the venue as an option. And I'm trying to recall, and I'm going to think it's approximately and I'm going to look at some of the admin staff here, the date when we have to provide rooming arrangements before they release the booking back to the public. No, neither of us can recall that date offhand, but we can pull that out and send that to yourselves and other commissioners so you're aware. I want to say that it's around the middle of December that we would need to provide an indication before they release the rooms. Thanks, Chair.
Mandates and requirements. Is there a responsibility for the IPHC Secretariat to ensure compliance with those procedures? Is that something that the hotel requires? Sort of what are the potential responsibilities or liabilities of the commission when it comes to addressing some of those issues?
Thanks for the question, Chair. And our experience for these last couple of days is that it's a requirement for the hotel that there are masking and vaccination elements in place for attendance. However, our experience is also that it's quite flexible, and I suggest that that's probably the case continent-wide, in that while there are local policies and practices in place, there does seem to be a reluctance to enforce them in a standardized way. And so I would suggest that should the meeting go ahead in a face-to-face format, that the commission agree to a set of protocols and circulate those, which would be not only consistent, but potentially even more precautionary than what is in place in Washington State. Thanks, Chair.
card type of thing if we don't, if we go virtual versus in-house?
Thank you very much for the question. At the moment, the way the contract is worded is that if there are COVID-19 related elements that would prevent us from holding the meeting, it's a get out of jail free card. But at this point, noting that we are quite close to the meeting, there would be an associated deposit that we would have to pay. I don't remember that number off the top of my head, but it would certainly have to be paid at this point, as we are within 60 days of the meeting itself. Thanks, Chair.
So, follow-up question through the chair. Yeah, so Dr. Wilson, does that mean at this meeting we should give you a whether or not we're going to have this meeting at the Hyatt or not? Are you up against a hard line on with the hotel?
Thanks, yes, and that would refer, through the chair, that would refer back to when the hotel is going to release the rooms that are currently as the block booking. And again, apologies, I don't recall that date, but I will dig that out and communicate it to commissioners. That would be what I'd class as a hard date, noting that the options before you are quite varied, and I would suspect that given the current operating environment that we're in, that we would be at best operating in a hybrid situation, as I'm sure there are stakeholders who, given the current COVID pandemic situation, would not like to attend in person, and therefore we would need to provide remote engagement as we're doing at this meeting, in addition to any in-person participation that the Commission might agree to. Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I think we may have lost you, Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Wilson, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Along with a few others. And if you had those protocols developed, it would be helpful to have those in advance of the 6th, if that's at all possible. Yeah.
Thanks. Yes, through the chair. In short, we have protocols that we're already applying both to the Secretariat offices and then also for this meeting and as we applied for the work meeting itself. What I would be proposing, hopefully by next Monday, the December 6th, is a range of options for you that we would like to seek Commission input on and potential endorsement of. And this would include, as was alluded to by the chair, how they would or would not be enforced. And that's a key element that the Secretariat wouldn't like to take on board, but something that we could certainly facilitate should the Commission agree to specific protocols that you'd like participants to follow. So look, we will do our best to get something to you by the 6th, next Monday. And if you could just shoot through the timing of that meeting, we'll make sure that we get that to you before then. It will likely be sort of a framework at that point for the various options. And then if we could get some initial feedback from you, we could then target a little bit more specifically on a couple of options. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Dave. I'll get that information to you for sure. Oh, I can give it to you now. It's 2 o'clock on the 6th. I don't know if you caught that, Dave.
Yes, I did. Thank you. That's correct, Chair. We are planning for a full commission in addition to having remote participation, and then we'll work down from there depending on the current operating environment. Thanks, Chair.
To highlight to the public some of the issues that have been under consideration, at least for other meetings. Many of the people who are on this call, at least from the U.S. side, also participate in the North Pacific Fishery Management Council process. There is a meeting that is scheduled right after the IPHC annual meeting. There was a decision in that body to move from an in-person hybrid meeting to a virtual meeting, and that was a decision that I believe was made late yesterday. Some of the factors that I think are at play there and are also factors that have been of concern, and we've heard this from a number of stakeholders as well, are the uncertainty about the environment that we would be operating in, as well as concerns about the ability to complete travel, potential risks of staff or members of the public being affected during the meeting. So those are definitely factors that were considered in that decision that was made by the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. I think we continue to be attentive to some of those concerns as well. I think one other factor that is perhaps even more complicated in this situation is international travel between the US and Canada. And obviously that does pose an additional complication or consideration that we may not know about at this point in time, but is something that I think as a commissioner, I'm certainly attentive to as well. Paul, did you have an additional?
That we come up with a decision so that people are fully informed and know what the situation is by no later than mid-December. Yes, that's correct.
Feedback from our delegation at the same time. Perhaps we can circle back after that has occurred. You had that opportunity to.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Glenn.
That's good. And we'll dig through the contract and just make sure we have those dates precise. Thanks, Chair.
To address under other items under this agenda item.
Yes, that's certainly the preferred option. Alternatively, we can provide that to you and you can adopt it via correspondence. Thanks, Chair. Thank you. Through the chair, we still have a couple of paragraphs to populate based on these decisions, the recent discussions this morning. At the moment, it's 81 paragraphs. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I guess, Glenn, my preference would be to do this kind of remotely. I think we can do that pretty quickly. We've done that in a number of ones rather than coming back and doing it online this afternoon. I'd rather do it remotely and work through it and go back and forth between us and then get it back to Dave.
Okay. Fine on our end as well. Dr. Wilson, if that works for you, then work remotely. I believe a lot of this report is probably very similar to previous years.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Yes, we'll articulate that in the draft report. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, there was just one public comment or question from Peggy Parker from Hannah. Again, just regarding the discussion we've just had surrounding the potential in-person meeting or virtual meeting. And it says, with the Omicron, and excuse my pronunciation, variant just beginning to move through the world and the pace has been described as much faster than any of the previous variants, why would there be a serious discussion to meet in person? So I think that's encapsulated in discussions we've had as well, and you've highlighted the decision-making process that you're going to go through over the coming weeks.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Commissioner Ryle?
here in the next hour or two?
Sorry, Paul, you cut out. Didn't you?
Okay, thanks, Glenn. Dave, when will we get the draft report?
Yes, I suspect that within an hour or so we'll be able to finalize those final draft paragraphs, and so you could expect that draft with all 6 commissioners within the hour. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Commissioner DeGroof? Thank you, Commissioner DeGroof, and I'd like to echo your sentiments as well, and wish Lara well in her future endeavors. So thank you, Lara.
Yes, and if I may just echo, you stole my thunder there, Commissioner. But yes, I'd just like to echo those sentiments and thank Lara again, as you've indicated, for just over 20 years of service to the IPHC, and very much appreciated, and we certainly do wish her well. Thank you.
Thank you, and I believe if there are any additional comments or questions, now's the time. And not seeing any, it sounds like we can adjourn this meeting, complete the report via correspondence, ideally later today, and have that available shortly thereafter. Is that correct, Dr. Wilson?
That's correct. Yes, Chair.
Thank you. With that, I would propose that we adjourn this meeting, and thanks everybody for your commitment and your time and providing us with this very helpful information to guide us in our upcoming annual meeting. Thanks all.